I think they start next month. They're going to be probably in the neighborhood of 1.5 to 2 hours long, and they'll be a little more detailed than what we're going to talk about today. Again, this is just sort of introduction to this new tool that's out there, and you'll kind of, if you don't have it, you can certainly go on to our Beeline website and download a demo version. It'll be good for 5 days and be fully functional. If you like what you see, by all means, feel free to buy a copy for yourself. We wouldn't complain about that. And let me point out, I'll mention this again during the presentation. This particular version of AerScreen is based upon the beta version the EPA released, I believe it was August of last year. When their final version is released, we will obviously update our Beeline AerScreen, and if you have a copy of it or in current maintenance, you can obviously download and install the new version of it when it comes out. So, having said all of that, let me go ahead and get started now with our introduction to Beeline AerScreen. By way of an overview, we're going to kind of give you an idea of what AerScreen is, with some comparisons of Screen 3 and AerScreen and AirMod and AerScreen. Then you'll see some screenshots of Beeline AerScreen, which again is our version. And then at the end of that, I'm going to do a little demonstration to sort of show you how this version works. Well, what is AerScreen? It's a single source screening model that's based upon AirMod. This refined dispersion model has been out there for several years now. And as you know, a screening model is one that is based on valid scientific principles, but you believe is going to give you conservative or somewhat over-predictive concentration calculations. And AerScreen will be a replacement for the existing Screen 3 model. Now, in terms of where we are with AerScreen, as I mentioned a little while ago, EPA released a beta version of AerScreen that is the computer code and an executable back in August of 2010. And at the time, they requested comments on that beta version within a 1-month period, and that closed September the 17th of 2010. If you saw the SCRAM notice when this came out, EPA said that you could look to see a final version of AerScreen by about the end of 2010. And then we released our version of Beeline AerScreen December the 14th of last year. Now, just to kind of add a little something to the status here that is not listed here, my understanding from talking to a couple of folks, I hope that they're in the know, EPA has not gotten very much in the way of substantial comments on the beta version of AerScreen. And so any changes that come about may be fairly minor. I'm hoping that they're fairly minor. But no matter what they are, we will update our AerScreen when EPA releases their final version. I also understand that basically we're waiting on all of the documentation for AerScreen to be finished before it goes final. Okay, the difference between AerScreen and Screen 3 and how AerScreen is like AirMod, well, AerScreen can handle some of the same source types, or all of the same source types as Screen 3. It can also handle the circular area source. Like AirMod, AerScreen uses the prime downwash algorithm, and in fact, if you have a complex building arrangement near your source, It will even call the BPIP prime preprocessor. If you have terrain in the vicinity of your source and you need to invoke that, it will also call or invoke the AirMap terrain preprocessor. Something new that's in AerScreen that's really different than what we had with Screen 3 is this MakeMet utility, which creates your screening metadata. If you remember in Screen 3, there's a pre-canned, if you will, metadata set that is used, but in AerScreen, it's going to create your metadata for you, and I'll show you in the screenshots and in the demo how this happens. And AerScreen also automatically includes the conversion factors for other averaging queries. In other words, AerScreen, just like Screen 3, will provide you a 1-hour predicted concentration. AerScreen, in this case, will also give you the equivalent, or the assumed equivalent, 3-hour, 8-hour, 24-hour, and annual concentrations. So, having said all that, what does our Beeline AerScreen look like? Okay, this first shot here shows you the opening page, if you will, and like all of our products, you'll have a couple of things you can select here, as well as a row of buttons, graphical buttons that you can select. What you'll see as we go through the demonstration is that as you load information via these tabs up here, it will be summarized in this front page right here. So if I were to kind of go through and click File, you'll see some of the same things that you see if you've run Beast before, for example, where you can start a new session, you can open an existing file, you can save what you have, you can import an AerScreen file from somewhere else. Next to that, we also have our Help menu, and this is very similar, again, like you see with Beast, where you have content with subject matter, a way to search for specific topics. Also included is our AerScreen tutorial, which is what I'm going to go through here in a short while. And we're going to have, right now this includes the draft AerScreen Users Guide that EPA released. Obviously, when the final comes out and it's no longer a stamped draft, selecting this will give you the most recent AerScreen Users Guide. We've also got a couple of ways to go to our website, both the home page and the software updates page. So if you click the little smokestack icon here, the icon for the source parameters, and much like Screen 3, you'll have the type of source you're modeling listed on the left-hand side, and then the source parameters that you will enter here on the rest of the pop-up. And for example, if you select a point, you can ask if I want to use a default vertically exiting stack or a rain-capped or horizontal stack. Now these are still considered beta options in AirMod, which means I'm assuming that they're beta versions for AerScreen. Here you also select either the rural or urban mode like AirMod. If you select urban, you have to give a population over here in this box. Otherwise, you have both English and metric data input that you can do for any particular point source. Of course, you're going to have the emission rate, a stack height, diameter, velocity, flow rate, exit temperature. And you can fill these up in this screen. If you click Close, or excuse me, if you go to Flare, again, this is like Screen 3 in that you put in a rate, a stack height, a heat release rate, and a heat loss fraction. And you don't have to, for this particular source type of flow, you don't have to put in the velocity or flow rate or diameter. There's a different algorithm that calculates that information internally. We also have a volume source, again, emission rate, release height, the initial dimensions or initial sigmas that you, the user, put in here. There's the area source, rate, release height, long side height, short side height, and initial vertical dimension. Let me also mention here, if I remember correctly, within AerScreen, if you are modeling an area source, you do not have the ability to account for terrain. Okay, next is the area circle. And again, this is different. This is not in Screen 3. This is new for AerScreen. So you'll have to put in the rate, release height, the radius of the area source, and an initial vertical dimension if you have one. So if you click that little close button here, now you start seeing the input data summary where information is being input. So if we did the stack data, you would see that information loaded here. So next, let's go to this little building icon. And within AerScreen, you can say that you don't want to use the on-wash. You can do a single rectangular building or a complex building array. And if you do single, you load the information here in terms of height, length, width, orientation compared to due north, stack direction, stack offset. And we'll see this in more detail when we do the demonstration. On the other hand, if you have a more complex arrangement of buildings, you would click this little button, and that activates this box here for where you would give it a VPIT prime input file, which we won't be doing for this particular demonstration. We'll probably be doing it when we do our AerScreen training webinar. So now we get the MakeMet meteorological utility, where what you load in is the minimum expected temperature, the maximum expected temperature, the minimum wind speed, or threshold, if you will, the anemometer height. And like AirMod, this net data set has to have a surface roughness, albedo, and Bowen ratio. And there's a couple of three ways you can do that. One is if you select this 0 where you load these in, or alternatively, you can select this land use number 9, and when you do that, you give it an air surface file name, and AerScreen will run air surface prior to creating your metadata with MakeMet. Next on our list is the receptors, and this is pretty straightforward. You have a what's called an ambient distance, which is this middle line here, which is where you want to start putting receptors, or where ambient air starts. And then the maximum receptor distance is the probe distance, which is where you want to stop, which is here. Excuse me. And if you want to put flagpole height on the receptors, you can certainly do that here. Next is the terrain options. And generally, you'll want to click Include Terrain, which check this box, which once you do, you'll go to this file and pull up the called demlist.txt. Click Open. Back up one, hold on. Down in this part of it right here, which you'll see when you do the demo, is where you will load in your sources location, both the easting and northing, and the UTM zone, and the NAD or the datum. So finally, we get to run AerScreen, and very simply, you'll want to give it a title and select Run. So now let me close this for a second, and we will go to our AerScreen. Here we go. Okay. Bear with me. Again, this is the first page that you see. And so what I want to do first is go to the source screen. And we're going to keep it fairly simple and do a point source. It's going to be a straight default stack rural mode. And I want to do 1 gram per second. Give it a 10-meter stack height. Diameter of 0.5 meter. And let's do exit velocity of 7.6 meters per second. I want to change the temperature, though. That's absolute zero, so I'm pretty sure we couldn't get there anyway. 470 kelvins. Okay. So we've got our source parameters, and when I click close, you can now see the information that I just input is now here under the stack data summary. So far, so good. Let's go to building dimensions. And I am going to do a single building. And I want to have, let's do English unit system. 13.25 feet tall, 45 feet long, 30 feet wide. Let's see. I'm going to do the building orientation at 90 degrees. My stack direction is going to be 0. And I want to make my offset 15 meters. And you see we have here this little graphic that shows you what is meant by each of those terms, the maximum, minimum, the building orientation, the stack direction, and the stack offset. So I've created my building for this, so I click close, and now you see that that information is now summarized up here. So next, let's go to our metadata. Minimum temperature, I'm going to make 273.15, which is 0 Celsius. My maximum temperature, I will just leave it at 310 for this exercise. My minimum wind speed is 0.4. My anemometer height is 10 meters. I'm going to use my input values here. So let me use 1 meter as my surface roughness. My albedo is 0.35. And my Bowen ratio is 1.5. Now, as I mentioned, you could also pick your land use types here, and there are defaults associated with each of those. all the way down to this use air surface value, which if you click this, it will activate the air surface file box here. But for right now, we're going to input our own. So let me click Close for MakeNet. And now that information is summarized here. Next is terrain. And, well, I want to include terrain, so I want to click this button. And I want to put in my source's base elevation, and I'll put in 103.4. Let me go to my File button here. And let me make sure I can find this, because I just installed this today. Okay. Click the terrain button, and I have a DEM file ready to go, so I want to click it. Actually, it's already in there, so that's good to go. I want to use MAT83, correct. I believe I'm in North Carolina, which is Zone 17. And finally, for this tab, I want to put in my source's location, which is 686.519.5 and northing of 3993.717. Okay. So we've got that guy loaded, and again, it sums it up here at the top, or not at the top, but under this row. So we've got all of our 5 inputs categories ready to go. The next thing we want to do is run the model. And this is example stack. I'm just going to call this save that guy. I say save. Now, and once you do that, you've now called up the original AerScreen, and it gives you some feedback here. I want to go ahead and start running the whole system, so I hit Enter, and now it's running AirMap and processing the receptors that it created. I didn't create them, it did, and this will take a little bit of time. And so one thing you're going to notice is that this is obviously not quite as fast, or the whole process actually is not quite as fast as Screen 3 was, but by the same token, it's certainly faster than if you had to do a complete air mod exercise. And it gives me time to take a drink of water. And we're almost done coming into the home stretch. one thing that I ought to point out is that one of the things that AerScreen does that Screen 3 did not is that Screen 3 always assumed you had a single plume center line. And that's a little different than what we have here in that Screen 3 is looking at moving the plume relative to the source receptor geometry, which is, again, part of why we have so many receptors. So right now it's processing the wind flow sectors for, I believe this is for BPIP prime, and now it's processing, I believe this is the second part of AerScreen, which is called refine. Okay, and it tells you that it's run, and you can press any key to go back to our AerScreen. And once you do, you get this little pop-up box that tells you that it's finished and gives you the maximum concentration and the distance. And you have the opportunity, or the option rather, to copy the meteorological files to a folder. I'm not going to do that here. And so you've run the model. You want to see what the results are. You have three options for doing that, which are these last three buttons up here. The first is display the output text as a list file, and basically you'll see the echo back of the stack parameters, the building downwatch parameters, the flow sector analysis, the MakeNet inputs, and then once you get down here, you have the automated distances with the maximum concentration at each distance. And at the very bottom is your maximum impact, which is the 139.6 that it told you on the pop-up at first. It gives you the distance from the source and the angle how it's directed, and a receptor height, which is based on, obviously, the terrain information. Now, if you want to see the information graphically, you can go to this little display line graph, and this gives you the concentration here in blue plotted against the terrain elevation here in the green. And here's your concentration axis and your elevation axis. One of the cool things is if there's a particular distance that you're interested in, let's say you know that there's a house at 400 meters downwind, you can follow up to the graph line. You'll see the set of crosshairs, and this one I actually picked 425. I guess I must have veered to the right somewhat, but it also gives you the distance and the concentration associated with that distance. Likewise, you can click on the green line, and it will tell you the distance downwind you are and the elevation at that point. One of the cool things that comes with this is if you want to change how this looks, you can right-click, and you have all different ways that you can change the way the plot looks, how the border looks, what the interior looks like, what chart labels look like, and so forth. So you have a lot more flexibility there than we did with Screen 3. You also have options where you can change the legend, you can change the location, move it to the bottom, for example. You have an editor here at the top where you can change how the elevation looks. Right now it's green. I want to change it to red, and it changes color. And likewise, you do the same thing with the concentration. So I want to change the color to yellow. That didn't work. Oh darn. Anyway, so you can change how you want that graph to look. Another thing you can do is if you click this last one here, which is the display sector graph, what this tells you is the ranges out here, if you will, are the concentrations in micrograms per cubic meter, and this is the 0 to 360 wind sector. So if you wanted to know what the concentration was for 30 degrees, you would come down to the blue line, you get the crosshairs, and it tells you that at 30 degrees, the maximum concentration that AerScreen saw was 103.70. And just like the other graphics, you can right-click and change the way the chart looks. You can change where the legend goes. You can change, oh, and here's another thing. This is where the scalars for the different averaging times come into play. So right now, we have 1 hour where that scalar is 1, and the conservative scalar for 3 hour is also 1. But what if you wanted to look at the 24-hour equivalent? That's 0.6. You would just click this, and the graph changes. And now, for example, you can say, oh, at 90 degrees, the 24-hour concentration is 70.2. You can also change the symbols, color and shapes, and the line as well. So you have some more ways to display your AerScreen output data besides just the list up here. So having said that, I believe that's it for the demo. There is my contact information. I'm at jred@auris-solutions.com. You can also reach me at 512-258-8855 or area code 828-628-0634. With that, that concludes this introduction to Beeline AerScreen, and I'll be happy to take any questions.